year, and happens to be that on Yom Kippur, Yud Tishrei, marks the Hilula of a very great Italian rabbi. His name was Rabbi Shmuel David Luzzatto. Zeche Tzadik Libracha. He was actually born in the English year 1800, and he passed away on the 30th of September in English year 1865. He was approximately 65 years at age of passing. He'd become a great Prshan Mikra, a great Torah commentator in of itself. He would speak the various different languages. Also, he was a philosopher. He was a rabbi that investigated various different books and translated many different books in of itself, and was one of the great rabbis of that specific period of time in Italy. And he was a head of Beit Midrash, a Torah study hall, where there was very many great rabbis from the vicinity of Padua in Italy, respectively. So let's explore some of the highlights of the great rabbi's life, which is very, very interesting enough. So he, as we said before, he was born actually in an area called Trieste in Italy, I think in the year 1800. I think there happened to be Rosh Chodesh Elul at the time. He would later on pass away in Padua in 1865. Naturally, that would have been Yom Kippur. While he was just a young child, he entered a Talmud Torah over there in his native city in Italy, respectively. And as well as learning the Talmud, in of itself the Gemara, he was taught under the auspice of a famous Italian rabbi, Rabbi Avram Eliezer Halevi, who I think happened to be actually the chief rabbi of Trieste at the time, and he was very, very distinguished rabbi of a synagogue in of itself, and very, very popular. He studied also various different ancient, let's just say, and modern languages also, so it was very worldly with regards to an educational voice of opinion. And he studied science, I think, under Mordechai de Colongna, Leon Vitasaravel, and also someone with the name Raphael Baruch Segre, if I'm not mistaken. And I think later on the latter would actually become his father-in-law, which is interesting enough. He studied Hebrew grammar, Hebrew language, for much of his times, as well as inside the school of itself. He would study at home, especially with his father, who I think he himself was a turner by trade, and was also very, very fluent within regards to the Talmud in of itself. Okay, so it's actually interesting. He had an extraordinary ability, even from a very young age. And he was learning various different books all across the Torah concept, let's say encompassment, including, I think one time it was recollected over that while he was reading the book of Job, which is part of the Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim, the Tanakh, at school, he formed the intention to write a commentary thereon, considering the existing commentaries to be, let's say, maybe he wanted to add on to some of the commentaries and stuff. And I think in the year 1811, he received as a prize, I think I'll say it specifically here in English, Montesquieu's Considerations sur les causes de la grada des Romains et de leur decadence. I think I pronounced it actually in, if I'm not mistaken, in French over here. This was a French book. This was the name of the book, which I think he was connected to in of itself, and he contributed very much to the development of within regards to that specific item, that specific book. His literacy, let's just say, activity began, I think, in that specific year in of itself. He undertook various different tasks within the Hebrew grammar, and also translating into Italian, which is very, very difficult to think. He translated into Hebrew the life of Aesop. Aesop, he himself, I believe, happened to be let's say a Greek fabulist, a legendary one, and a storyteller in of itself. And he wrote, I think various different notes on the Pentateuch. That obviously, that is a terminology we use for the 5 books of Moses, the Chamushei Torah also. And very much it would actually look at the Targum Onkelos, study Aramaic. He was very, very proficient in all the different languages, which are very essential within regards for Hebrew writings. Only at the age of 13, he left school to attend various different Gemara Torah lectures, I believe under the auspices of Rabbi Abraham Eliezer Halevi. And I believe one time it's reported over that while he was reading the Ein Yaakov, he came to different conclusions, let's say within regards to accents and vowels, and saying how it might have been different to the time period of the Talmudists and various other different spaces in of its time, which is very interesting. I believe in the year 1814, it became a very tough period at that stage in time, because I think sadly his mother passed away in that specific year, and he had to take on a lot more responsibilities in house, also to help his father, who was, as we said before, was working as a turner. But by the end of the year 1815, he was reported over, he had composed by that stage 37 poems, which I think formed in of itself a part of the famous Kinor Na'im. And in the year 1817, he finishes Ma'amar Hanikud also, which was, I believe, a publication with regards to teaching about different the vowels, the Hebrew vowels in himself. And in the year 1818, he began to write his Torah Nidreshet, which was a philosophically theological work, of which he composed only, let's say, 24 chapters. The first one being published, I think, in the Kochve Yitzchak, if I'm not mistaken, and the remainder translated into the Italian language by someone of the family named Cohen Porto, if I'm not mistaken, and was published in Mosè, I think. And in the year 1879, actually, it happened to be that Cohen Porto would actually publish a translation of the whole work in a book form, in spite, let's say, his father's desire that he should learn a trade. And Rabbi Luzzatto had no inclination for one, and to earn his livelihood, he gave various different private Torah lessons over. He found different students, Talmidim, with, like, say, difficulties on account of maybe various different, let's say, their shyness issues, or they might not be capable, so really, really helped teaching, especially on a personalized level. And I think from the year 1824, I think sadly at that stage his father passed away. He had to depend entirely upon himself at that stage in time. And until 1829, he earned a livelihood by giving lessons and by writing for I believe the Bikoreh HaLitim. I think he was also, if I'm not mistaken, appointed a professor in the Rabbinical College of Padua. So now, this Bikoreh HaLitim in of itself was a Hebrew language annual published, I believe, actually in Austria, in Vienna, between the years 1820 to 1831. I think this in of itself was founded by Salomon Jacob Cohen, very, very great person of itself. Maybe we will speak about him on another occasion. So let's look at some of the Torah works that he left us. We know that we stated before that he was a philosopher in of itself, a very, very clever one. We have to point out also. So let's see some of the works. I think his actually writing career in of itself spanned for a staggering 50-year period. Despite, I believe, he was only 65 years at the age of passing, he wrote various different great Torah works in of itself. And different correspondence came in Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken, also in Italian, also in German and French. So it was very well traveled with regards from a language perspective in of itself. And he also at this time, he contributed to most of the Hebrew and Jewish periodicals of that specific time in itself. I think he had a great correspondence with contemporaries. He would have robust debates with them, and it was very, very important. How important it is to delegate and to speak to other people in general, especially people that might not come from your tribe in these specific areas, you could say in itself. Now let's look at some of the works he actually published. There's a lot of different books. And let's explore it. I think the first one we can speak about is the Kinor Na'im, which you mentioned just about before. It was actually printed in Vienna, I believe, in the year 1825. Then there was the Kina, which was printed in the year 1826. And I think it was like a eulogy of some sort with regards to great Rabbi Abraham Eliezer Halevi. Then there was another book called the Ohev Ger, which was actually printed in Vienna, I think, in the year 1830. It was a guide to understanding Targum Unclus in of itself. What's interesting, then there was Hafla'ah Sheba Arakin. This happened to be, I think, actually by Isaiah Berlin, and Rabbi Luzzatto himself, he edited it. Then there was the Seder Tenaim Va Amoraim, which I think was actually printed in Prague, in Czech Republic, or the old Czechoslovakia, in the year 1839. And I think the revised editions had come out. Then there was a Betulat Bat Yehuda, which I think also once again printed in Prague in the year 1840. And this had extracts from, let's say, Daiwan of Judah Halevi, and edited, let's say, with notes and an introduction. Then another great book was, I think, Avnei Zikaron, which actually, I think, printed also in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, in the year 1841. Right? I think it was comprised of 76 epitaphs from the century of Toledo, following a commentary on the Mikrah by Jacob Pardo, which is very interesting enough. Now, another great Torah work, I believe, which he was featuring was a Beit HaTzoar, or Beit HaOtzar, which is very interesting. It was a collection of various different essays on the Hebrew language and exegetical, archaeological notes, which are very important. Today, I just went to visit some archaeological places in Bleshem. Another great book was HaMishtadel, which was printed in Vienna in the year 1849. Then there was a Vikuach al HaKabbalah, which I think was printed in the year 1852, and it gave dialogues on Kabbalah and on, let's say, the antiquity of punctuation and different other important parts within regards to the religion, how it has a central point. And there was a Mavor Leghorn in the year 1856. This was printed, and it was historical and, let's say, a critical introduction to the Machzor in itself. The Machzor is what we recite. It's like a Siddur on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Then I think 86 religious poems was actually tried and published, I think, through Judah Halevi, which I think he himself looked over all the vowels, how it was, how to correct it. He knew exactly, he was a visionary, or he is a visionary, how to actually search it about. Another great book is, let's say, the Yad Yosef, which is based actually from 1864. And it's a catalogue of the library of a person named Joseph Al-Manzi, which is very interesting enough. He happened to be, I think he was an Italian Jewish, let's say, Bibliophile, and a poet also, which is very, very interesting enough. And other books was the Ma'amar Be'yustei HaDikduk, which I think also once again was printed in Austria in 1865. It was a treatise on the Hebrew grammar in of itself. And there was another great work, the Herev HaMit Apeleket. This was printed, I think, in Amsterdam. Now we're in the Netherlands territory. In the year 1865, it was a poem of Rabbi Bedersi, who he himself had published for the first time with a preface and a no-no, like an I sign, commentary at the beginning of the Berdesi's Hotam Toknat. I think this, so this was printed in 1865 in Amsterdam. So it's interesting, a lot of these books that we're talking about here were printed in different places, so we see the diversity of it. Then there was a Perushay Shedal, which I think was a commentary on Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Proverbs, and Job, respectively, also. So how important is to learn that? Then there was Nahalat Shedal, which I think was in Berlin. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you have to go in a bit more, possibly within regards to that. This Nahalat Shedal actually was comprising of two parts. The first contained a list of the Gaonim and the rabbis, and the second part of various different Paitanim and Piyutim also. Then there was a Tal Orot printed in the year 1881. That sage passed away already many years before. It was a collection of 81 unpublished Piyutim and amended also. Then there was Igorot Shedal, which I think was printed in the year 1882, and it had 301 letters published by Isaiah Luzzatto and preferred by the David Kingdom, by David Kaufman, if I'm not mistaken, also, so which is very interesting. He also wrote translations into Italian also, which is also very interesting enough. You see how great the rabbis were, how worldly their knowledge was over here, especially at that specific time, especially in the early, let's say, in that specific Kufa in of itself. So a lot more can be read about him, a lot more can be related over to him. And it is going to be his Hilula here. The date of his passing was September 30th, so already went that past in the English calendar in of itself. But he passed away on Yud Tishrei. It was the 10th of Tishrei. Very auspicious time where I recommend very much to everybody to go to the synagogue on Yom Kippur to try and fast as much as you can. Get them used to at a young age, the kids, and show them love and how important it is. So on that zchut, Yud Tishrei is a Hilul of Rabbi Shmuel David Luzzatto, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, one of the great rabbis from Italy, and very much near his synagogue, you'll find a lot of the great archaeological different findings, let's just say, in the Bet Shemesh history. So wishing you all a good day.